Really, really appreciate it. And we're very lucky to have some extraordinary people with me today. And I want to make sure that you have a chance to hear directly from those who are working to fix the problems within Child Protective Services, and those who've worked within Child Protective Services, those who have been clients of Child Protective Services, so that we fully understand what's happening within Child Protective Services and how we fix Child Protective Services going forward. You all reported on news that we learned last week that we were initially told 7, we now learned it's up to 11 young girls ages 11 to 17 who were rescued from being trafficked for sex in different parts of Texas. Rescued, they thought, by the state of Texas, were turned over to an agency by the state of Texas, whose employees then turned around and continued to traffic these girls, again, ages 11 to 17 years old, for sex. I want to make sure that everyone understands that they thought they were being rescued. They came into an agency that is contracted with the state of Texas and were in turn trafficked again for sex. What is almost unbelievable is that the governor and his office were alerted to this issue back in January. And it took them a month and a half after they learned that girls who'd been trafficked for sex had been turned over to an agency that was then trafficking them again for sex. It took them a month and a half to take those young girls out of that specific facility. I wish that this were an anomaly within the state of Texas and within this administration, but as you all know, because you reported on this, it is not. 6 years ago, Judge Janice Jack said that the children who are aging out of CPS leave the system more damaged than when they went in. I think that would describe those 11 girls that we just learned about in Bastrop last week. Then that same judge in January, this is 6 years later, says that the situation within CPS has gone from bad to worse. So as bad as it was 6 years ago, it has gotten worse. And I want to tell you that despite the best efforts of those that you're about to hear from, the governor, who holds the highest position of power and public trust, has absolutely failed the children of Texas and the more than 30,000 kids who are in the foster care system in this state. He's been repeatedly warned, given many opportunities, been mandated by the court to fix this 3 separate times. And yet we learned last week that it has actually gotten much, much worse. Last thing that I want to share with you is that in just the last 2 years, 23 Texas children have died within CPS custody. 23 kids. You all know the stories about kids sleeping in the offices, under the desks, in the hallways at CPS, and not because the caseworkers, by and large, aren't trying hard. They're trying under extraordinary, difficult conditions. But it's because those in power have not provided the resources, the oversight, and the accountability to make sure that those kids can come through okay. So I want to make sure everyone has this context before we hear from some of the leaders who I trust will change this and make it better, and from some of those who've experienced this system firsthand. The first person that we're going to hear from is State Senator Sarah Eckhardt, who, in addition to her advocacy and her work within the legislature to improve conditions for these kids and hold those within CPS accountable, when she was a county commissioner here in Travis County and a county judge in Travis County, she was known for putting families and children first, and that is exactly what she is doing right now. So I'm going to turn this over to Senator Eckhardt. Senator, thank you. Yes.
Well, I am State Senator Sarah Eckhardt, and I was a Travis County judge. And I want to talk to you about the work and the unbelievable people on the front lines who are doing that work. The work is to support Texas families and to keep Texas children safe. And there are amazing partnerships at the local level with frontline workers, like some of the folks that are here with us today, who are supporting families and keeping children safe against unbelievable odds. But their work is so much harder, made so much harder, by state leadership that is failing and is playing politics with children's lives. I will tell you, as a county judge, as a county commissioner before that, as a prosecutor before that, I can tell you firsthand that the state system for families and children has been fragile and on the verge of collapse for years. And it's not just Child Protective Services. That is just one unit in a balkanized and collapsing system. But the good news that's worthy of celebrating is that there are amazing people at the front line who are doing incredible collaborations. I can tell you firsthand that in 2019, when we thought the Department of Family and Protective Services had absolutely hit rock bottom, we had local judges, local nonprofits, local philanthropists, and the caseworkers in CPS themselves coming together to collaborate on ways to shore up the system, on ways to fill the gaps left by a collapsing state system. And that collaboration still exists. It's called the Child Welfare Reimagined program in Travis County. And it's not the only one in the state. You're going to hear about collaborations in Harris County today. There are collaborations in Bexar County. There are collaborations in Tarrant County that are doing their best to fill the gaps left by a collapsing state system. But they are being overwhelmed by failing leadership and politics at the highest levels. In 2019, Greg Abbott appointed new leadership over the Department of Family and Protective Services. We thought it had hit rock bottom, but it has gone from bad to worse. What we thought was a crisis with 50 children across the state without placement has become a crisis of 300 children across the state without placement. The department is spending hundreds of millions of dollars, and yet nonprofits that are expert in the field and can provide the services to these children are closing or locating elsewhere or choosing not to come to the state of Texas at all. Children are still in offices and hotel rooms. They're being carted out of state, sometimes in restraints, like they're animals. Children are going to the hospital with serious injuries while they are in child protective custody. They are overdosing on drugs while in state custody. The governor's office of child sex trafficking has $3.5 million, and yet children in state custody are trafficked for sex right under his nose. A mother who neglected and abused her child this way would have her parental rights taken away. We should take Greg Abbott's governmental rights away. The job, again, is supporting Texas families and protecting Texas children effectively, efficiently, fairly, and in the least intrusive way. But Greg Abbott fails on every single count. And Ken Paxton and Dan Patrick enable and encourage and perhaps demand Greg Abbott's worst aspects by villainizing and terrorizing LGBTQ children, refusing to expand Medicaid for Texas families, not taking federal Family First dollars, not listening to local leaders, and even attempting to silence them, with disastrous consequences for children and their families. So for the sake of those children, do not allow Greg Abbott to play politics with children's lives. Vote him and those two other guys out and replace them with good public servants like Beto O'Rourke. Cross party lines if you have to. Our children depend upon it so that we can get back to the good work of supporting families and protecting our children. And with that, I'd like to introduce Minister Teresa Allen, an amazing advocate out of Harris County.
Thank you so much. I appreciate this wonderful opportunity to finally get before the public you guys coming out to help extend our voices, finally. In 2009, my beautiful grandchildren, ages 1 and 2, were wrongfully taken and illegally taken from my care and placed into foster care by a representative or a caseworker of Children Protective Services. My granddaughter, she was having her on December 8th, 4 days after CPS broke into my home and took my grandchildren. She would have turned 2. A few months later, my grandson would have turned 4. This is my beautiful granddaughter, Caitlin. She is now 15 years old. This is my handsome grandson. He is now 17 years old. While in foster care, my grandson was placed on several psychotropic drugs because he continued to make his request to come home. And CPS wanted to sweep under the rug that they had falsified a court's order, falsified some type of document stating that they had the right to remove the children. My daughter had placed herself in rehab and had given me a power of attorney, placing the children in my care. But this was after I had to call CPS to report that she had the children in an unsafe environment. Our family was working together. I can't tell you how I felt when CPS began to sabotage, I don't even know the right words to say, the things that they've done to try to separate and destroy my family, to hide the fact that they overlooked the case, and the lady was in fear of losing her job. But it resulted in a great deal of trauma that even after all these years, it devastates my grandchildren and myself. When I finally got my grandchildren back, this is when I learned about the medication that my grandson was on. He couldn't eat because the side effects of the medication caused severe psychosis. It made his food move. Y'all heard me say 3 years old, several psychotropic medication. He couldn't eat. His clothes, the side effects from the medication gave him strong hallucinations. My granddaughter, she couldn't sleep within 15-minute increments because she would wake up with severe anxiety of nightmares, stating that she was afraid that CPS was coming to get her. She shared the dreams with me, which I don't have time to go into to share these things with you all. I finally got a reporter, Fox News, Randy Wallace, did a story on my grandchildren and I. I thought that was good. I thought that once that story was out, I thought like every other parent, all the other stories that have been reported for I don't know how many decades, all the exposure, and nobody still cared. I thought that someone would care. I thought reporters would just flood out and contact me so that my grandchildren could tell you what happened to them. I was looking for somebody that cared. I'm tired of hearing story after story after story. And now I'm in 2022, and my grandchildren saw Governor Beto on TV. And they came to me unanimously, and they drugged me to the TV. And they said, it's gonna come on again, Granny. This man, he remind you of Barack Obama. And I'm like, I don't care about none of them, no politics. I don't want to hear nothing, because I was in my feelings. And I looked at him, and I looked at my grandchildren. The tears that were in their eyes, they begged me to contact this man. And out of all of these people that's running for whatever they running for, probably running for the money, he's the only physical person that I've ever had the opportunity to meet, to encourage me to vote for the first time in my life. And we knocked on doors, and we're letting everybody we talked to asked me to send a message to this man that it's time for a change, for real. time for a change for real. Throughout our experience, I developed a nonprofit organization entitled Freedom Fighters for Families. And what our organization is set up to do is to just be another extended arm within the system to assist family members who have loved ones that are dealing with or accusations of abuse and or neglect by CPS and being investigated. The only thing we want to do is help these children to stay out of the system and be placed with someone that they know or with a family member. I am number 11 out of 12 children. I was the baby for 6 years. Why did my grandchildren have to be taken away from me, and I've done nothing wrong, and be placed with strangers who left them in the dark at night by themselves while they went party and got paid for it? Why did that have to happen to us? So our organization, I want to read this to you really, really quick, because I'm looking at somebody who's dealing with the time. At the time when I wrote this speech, I wrote it to compete in a competition for, I think it was one of the universities, and I won. Only thing that made me, that outdid me was adopted, and she deserved it. But the statistics at the time, it says according to the DFPS database at the time, I don't know what they are now. It's hard to keep up with it. It says the number of children in foster care in Texas alone was 35, almost 36,000 children at the time. And it says that only, out of that number, only 300 were placed. Let me statistics show that the number of the children in Harris County foster care was 4,226 at the time. Out of 35,000, that's just how many is placed with family members. Someone that these children know. Now we know that they're sex trafficking our kids. We've been knowing that. It says out of the number in Jefferson County, which is where I'm from, it says that it was 4,226. And out of that number, if I'm not wrong, only 4%. 4% of our children. Our slogan is, your children is our children. You never know how this feels until this happened to you. God had to allow my grandchildren to go into the system in order for me to be here before you. I hope that some of you tap us on our shoulder and that you talk to my grandchildren as if they were your sister, your brother, your child, your mama, your cousin, whoever it is, that you speak to these kids and you hear their story, because they are the future generation. Now my grandson is working for HEB. He started at 16 years old. My granddaughter just got a job working for HISD at 15 years old. She's going to be a mentor and a teacher, a tutor, to helping other children who missed out during the pandemic. They're suffering. A lot of these children are suffering because most of them are in foster care. I give you my time over. I'm sure I went well over, and I want you to invite me back. But I want to let you guys know something. I'm passionate about this, and the preaching me come out. And it's hard for me to put something that happened so many years, so many decades, in 3 minutes. How are you going to do that? I guarantee you, somebody out there, even you guys behind the camera, you know somebody that's dealing with CPS issues. You've reported stories on CPS issues, or you dealt with it yourself. But everybody understand and know, but who's going to do something about it? You know why? Who's going to do it? My grandson, because he wants to be a judge. It's because of this man, our governor, that he decided to run for National Honor Society, and he became the vice president of the National Honor Society, and I applaud him for that. God bless you.
I had a chance to meet with Reverend Teresa Allen a little bit earlier, and to meet Elijah and Caitlin. And it's very clear that she's been an extraordinary parent for these two kids. But as Senator Eckhart mentioned, those children should not have had to go through this process or that system. This governor has rejected the federal Families First money, tens of millions of dollars, that seeks to keep kids with their families in these really tough situations, so they don't have to go through this system and experience what these two children did, or even worse, what those 11 girls we just learned about in Bastrop. So this didn't have to happen. There are changes that we could have made. Our next speaker is a young woman named Nyla Urson, who was within CPS as a part of this foster care system, has aged out and wants to share her perspective right now. Nyla, looking forward to that.
Hi, as he said, I was in foster care about 6 years ago. I did age out, so I got to see what it was like for younger kids and older kids. So I've been blessed to kind of have the experience to see things not just from my perspective in dealing with the many variety of issues that foster care kids can have, but to also have seen my own empirical experience be handled by different powers of authority, and that was really interesting. So I was in a shelter that was similar to the shelter that was found out for sex trafficking, which is quite disgusting, to say the least, because as she mentioned, this is our generation, and when people look at foster youth as disposable humans, it's sociopathic in a way, because you can't really connect when you don't experience it from their perspective. So it's very vital that we look at these kids as not they're somebody else's kids, and we should just do it because that's what looks good and that's what looks right, but we should feel the pain as if you yourself experienced it. And that's what I experienced a lot of while also working for the FPS. As I aged out, I wanted to make change. I've been advocating, and I went to Congress. I went and shadowed Sheila Jackson, which shout out Sheila Jackson, you are amazing. And I saw some of the amazing Democrats, and I'm not partisan, really, not on this issue. I care about change, and it's supposedly a bipartisan issue, but I'm empirically saying that I experienced only Democrats making action. When I went to Congress, I stayed there for a week, and I did a lot of work, and I shadowed these Congress people who were supposed to make legislation so that I could actually see the statistics changing, and that did not happen. Only Democrats showed up, no Republicans. So I respect Governor Abbott for his efforts, but I do not commend him for the actions that have not been taken. Unfortunately, Beto is the only one that I can see right now that is actually trying to make actual change in Texas on this issue. I'm not partisan on this issue. I just care about change. I'm very utilitarian in that sense. But when you see children crying and looking to me, I'm completely unrelated to them, and I've only been in the system for a very short amount of time. When they look to me to be a mother figure, that's disappointing. That's different tiers of disappointment for that child. And then these children grow up and are expected to participate in a society where they will not be shown mercy. They will not even tell people that they were in the system out of embarrassment. Like myself, I did not. I carry myself to a higher degree. And so a lot of foster youth do that, unfortunately. They try to make up the gaps that adults have filled them in. And it is too much. It is impossible. It's near impossible to do that. They are suffering neurological trauma. Just like these girls, they will spend the rest of their lives figuring out A, what they did, and B, why the people around them let them. It's disgusting. It is disgusting to have this stereotype for foster youth, because they are some of the most talented, bright-minded, just like these children here, bright-minded, creative people of society that could actually go on to changing the movement of our society. There's a lot of problems, and it is not just foster care. There's problems with homelessness, there's problem in crimes, there's problems anywhere you look. For an advocate, I told Beto I will never run out of ideas to help people. They could be the change. They have experienced the system of oppressiveness, and they could go on to help in other areas where some people, such as the higher ups here and in politics, need to realize they don't have the capacity to experience the empathy you need to make actual change. And that's okay, but step down. Step down and let somebody else do that. Somebody else who actually has the capacity. That's really all I have to say, and I really hope that this actually works in our favor to change, because situations like this is not unique. Part of my job here was to cover up stories like this. Needless to say, I didn't work here longer than a year. It didn't take me very long to realize what was happening. I was a token foster care youth, and that was not going to be part of my legacy. So I would like to hopefully extend more hands out to people who are afraid to speak up, and people like who are not used to voting or being in politics. That's fair, but this is a bipartisan issue. It doesn't matter if you're Republican or Democrat, you go with the one that makes the most action. And in this area, if you do care about the kids and you have that sticker on the back of your car, then you need to vote for Beto instead of Governor Abbott. His time has come. Thank you.
Nyla, great job. Thank you so much. You did great. You did really good. I got to tell you, just listening to Nyla, I think you could be forgiven if you just said, to hell with the politicians and the people who are part of this system, because it clearly has not changed or gotten better. And as Judge Jack has said, it has actually gotten worse over the last 6 years. But the fact that you still have the persistence and the tenacity, and you're willing to do your part and take action, is really inspiring to me and gives us some confidence that we're going to be able to come through. I want to introduce you now to Candice Henson, who actually worked within CPS for 9 years, and I want her to share her perspective from the inside of this agency. So, Candice, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thanks for joining us.
I'm going to read from my sheet because I cannot go off the cuff as well as some of these folks. So my name is Candice Vincent, and I'm a born and raised Texan, and I'm a social worker here in Austin. And from January of 2013 to September of 2021, I was very proud to be a CPS employee. I worked as a conservatorship caseworker, as a mentor, as a supervisor, and as a policy and best practice specialist here at State Office. Despite the long hours, the stressful circumstances, and the low pay, I loved my work, and I was dedicated to serving the children and families of Texas, and I thought that I would spend my whole career with CPS, and I couldn't imagine doing anything else. I always knew that the system needed improvements and oversight, but most of the time, I believed that my coworkers and the leadership were doing the best that they could to work within a crumbling and underfunded system and to intervene with traumatized and marginalized families who desperately needed help. The latest scandal to reach the public, the exploitation of these children and youth by a treatment center that was tasked with protecting them and helping them heal from the trauma of sex trafficking, is a symptom of a systemic issue. The agency is hamstrung by continuing to have too many cooks in the kitchen, and many of the cooks couldn't even make Kraft mac and cheese. While there have been efforts to overhaul and improve child protection and investigation practices in Texas for many years, reform efforts have been insufficient and in many cases have made things even worse. I finally left CPS when I felt that I could no longer honor my ethics while remaining there. The placement crisis, the ongoing lawsuit, the ever-expanding administrative requirements, and the culture of passing the buck took the focus off of the important work of helping families develop their capacity to keep their children safe, and this made thoughtful and engaged casework practically impossible. Reform efforts through community-based care continue to face major challenges to the purported goal of keeping children within their own communities. Reform efforts through the foster care lawsuit apply knee-jerk, reactive, and punitive methods to an already strained system, distracting staff from the work of child safety, family preservation, and reunification, and instead focusing on reacting to issues of the lawsuit to try to prevent further sanctions and practices that are barriers to effective casework. Reform efforts through new laws enacted by the legislature are often misguided, demonstrating that most lawmakers do not understand the agency that they are seeking to improve. There are many hard-working, compassionate, dedicated, and creative staff at CPS, and I'm fortunate to count many of them as friends. Unfortunately, the state's executives are busy fomenting a moral panic over life-saving, gender-affirming care. In the fall of 2021, the CPS Associate Commissioner told the legislature in a special session that one effort to reduce the number of children and youth sleeping in unlicensed facilities and offices was to reduce removal actions by the state by requiring regional directors, there are only 11 of them, to approve any removal action for children over 12 years of age and collaborate with the family to engage mental health supports. This solution belies a startling lack of insight and understanding into the existing policies and practices of child protective investigations and child protective services that has been going on for years, and this is from one of its top executives. Make no mistake, the challenges the state faces in child welfare cannot be solved when elected officials lack the knowledge, time, and attention span to thoroughly address complicated and interrelated issues. When political appointees misrepresent the agency practices and plans to the legislature, and agency staff are intimidated, bullied, and ignored with no avenue for legitimate complaints to be heard. Accountability is passed down to lower level staff instead of addressed with incompetent management who perpetuate dysfunction. If reform efforts are to be successful, they must be thoughtfully considered, collaboratively implemented, and appropriately funded. Fund the mandates. Every new law or policy must be accompanied by appropriate and proportionate funding. Take a good hard look at what people are being paid. Direct care workers in residential treatment centers like the Refuge are almost always paid at a shockingly low rate, are under enormous stress, and are expected to do work that requires a high level of skill in de-escalation, trust building, understanding of trauma, child development, and mental health. No matter who is in the office of the Texas governor, there is a great need for change in this system, and I challenge all lawmakers and Mr. O'Rourke as well to develop a robust policy agenda on these issues that includes the voices of those who are impacted. And the families of Texas have waited long enough. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. It's so helpful to get your perspective on this. The last speaker that we're going to hear from is someone who, since she was first elected just in 2020, has really distinguished herself on this issue, being a fierce champion for kids within the system, but kids across the state of Texas and their families. But for those who knew her prior to her time as a state representative, that's no surprise, because she was known in Harris County as a fierce prosecutor of those who would traffic in children and to destroy these families in that community. So very, very grateful to have Ann Johnson, state representative, here with us from Houston, who's leading on this issue, and again, someone who gives me faith that we'll be able to overcome some of these challenges. Representative Johnson, thank you. Yes.
Thank you, everybody, for coming out. And thank you for standing in front of this building. This building that represents the Texas Department of Family and Protective Services. You may ask, why am I here? And I am here because back in 2007, I was appointed in Harris County to represent a 13-year-old little girl who was charged with prostitution. I believed that it was wrong that the state of Texas was prosecuting her, and challenged it all the way to the Texas Supreme Court. Along that way, I was told by everybody, you don't have a snowball's chance in hell at winning this case because this is just the way we've always done it. I am proud to tell you we made, on behalf of that child, a significant change in Texas law. And when you look at that child, you will see the record shows she was a 13-year-old child who was a CPS runaway and had been on the streets for 14 months. I am tired of political advertisements touting human trafficking and screaming about the border because it keeps you from knowing this is not a border issue. This is an Abbott issue. The kids that are being victimized are your kids. They're CPS kids. 90% of victims of human trafficking suffered child abuse. They've lived for decades through this failed system. And I have no doubt that politically we'll see Governor Abbott talk about human trafficking and the things that he wants to do. And I want to remind you of Texas history. This man has been in charge of this problem for 2 decades. The Attorney General for 13 years and now Governor. And this sits squarely at his feet. And so when you think about the kind of outrage that comes from children living in offices, from children being abused in quotes of exorbitant caseloads, children in state facilities and houses that are dangerous, and that this is a measure of the system's failure, calling the abuse reprehensible and pretty much unforgivable. You may say, Ann, who said that last week? And I'll tell you, that wasn't from last week, that was from 2016. This is not a new issue. And the fish rots from the head. And the head of the problem with this system is Governor Greg Abbott. And I have no doubt that as we stand in this building, that corner office, we are now 2 or 3 people into his administration that have fallen and thrown in front of the political bus. The latest, Jamie McMaster's, plucked from Kansas and has effectively sat underneath his political thumb. I am asking the voters of Texas, in the same way that people say, you can't change it, this is just the way we've always done it. When people cry about the abuse and the inequities in the system for children, remember that for these decades, it has been Governor Abbott at the hands of it. And so I am asking you to make the same progress that we made for BW and do it for every other child that is trapped in this system, and get rid of Governor Greg Abbott.
Yes.
He has shown no courage to take on the complexities of this challenge. And it is time for somebody who can actually take on the vulnerabilities and the fight that every Texas child deserves. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Johnson, for sharing that, and for your work on this incredibly important issue. I want to just very quickly correct the record, something I said earlier at the beginning of the press conference. There were 7 girls in that facility in Bastrop, ages 11 to 17, who were trafficked functionally by the state of Texas after they thought they'd been rescued from traffickers in other parts of the state. As we bring this to a close, I want to heed Candace's guidance on here that in addition to outlining the problems and calling everyone's attention to the fact that, as Representative Johnson just said, this isn't something that's happening right now. This is something that has been happening for years, for decades in the state of Texas. And those who had the power and who were placed in positions of public trust to change and improve this and look out for those kids absolutely failed. So, to Candace's guidance, what are we going to do? How do we make this better? I've listened to Senator Eckhart and the State Representative Johnson. I've listened to those who aged out of the system. I've listened to families who had their kids taken away from them. I've listened to those who work for CPS. And here's some ideas that come from those who understand this issue best. Senator Eckhart mentioned a program called Families First. And that name is really important. What we have to be doing going forward is prioritizing keeping kids with their families whenever we can. And there's actually a federal program that comes with tens of millions of dollars that will assist the state of Texas and CPS specifically in being able to do that, to hire the additional caseworkers where necessary, and to provide that care and help with families so that kids are not taken from them. As governor, I'm going to make sure that we take that federal money, that federal assistance, and wherever possible, making sure that the care and welfare of that child is paramount, we try to keep them with their family. Number 2, we're going to invest heavily in access to mental health care, both for children who should not be placed on psychotropic medications when they're 3 years old outside of their parents' care, but also for their families and their parents and their grandparents who so often in the least insured state in the country are dealing with mental health care challenges unsuccessfully and endangering those children who are within their care. We've got to invest in that if we're going to make it better. Number 3, we need to invest in CPS. More caseworkers, more oversight, and more accountability. All of those things have been missing thus far. We have to have more resources. That is clear. But we also have to have a governor who's focused on correcting the problem and holding those who are responsible for it accountable. As the senator mentioned earlier, instead of using the resources of those who work here in this building behind us to address the issue that we just found out about in Bastrop, this governor is asking them to go after the parents of transgender children, who very often are living in loving homes right now with parents who are doing their best to deliver for those kids and make sure that they're okay. If there were ever a case of twisted priorities in the state of Texas, it is in what the governor is doing to the children of this state right now. And the last thing, point number 4, is making sure that when possible, again, with the welfare and the care and the outcome of those children being paramount, that if we have to place them, we place them with other family members. We had a chance to hear from Reverend Teresa Allen earlier, losing those kids for 2 years, but then getting them back. And you've had a chance to hear about just how successfully Caitlin and Elijah have turned out. Only their grandmother could provide this kind of love and care and support and produce the outcome that we're witness to right now. I want to make sure that that is a priority of the state going forward. Now, having said this and made sure that you all had a chance to hear from those who understand this issue the best, I want to make sure that each of us is available to each of you should you have any questions. And I want to remind you that everyone here is more than willing to answer the questions that you might want to ask. And you have extraordinary perspective from within inside the system here, and I certainly encourage you to avail yourselves of it. Thanks again for coming out, and we'll stand back and await your questions.
What can we do on the front end, as far as helping families before it becomes a crisis, before kids are taken away? I didn't hear much about that. I just heard about the reactive.
I'm going to ask anyone who'd like to add to this to jump in, but that second point I made, investing in access to mental health care right now is so incredibly important. And then making sure that you don't need an act of the legislature. You don't need any changes at all. You could do it right now. Making sure that we prioritize placement within families or keep those kids in those families right now. Governor Abbott has rejected tens of millions of dollars in federal support that would help those kids right now. So again, we don't have to wait for anything. The governor could choose to help those families, but he has chosen not to. Would anyone else like to add to this in terms of what we can do right now? Yes, Senator Eckhart.
There are 2 tranches of money in the Family First funding. There are 2 tranches of money. One is for quality placements, but the other tranche of money is for upstream supports to families so that these children won't ever be removed. And we're foregoing both of those tranches of money. And at the local level, you are seeing partnerships that are predominantly funded by local dollars. Through our court system, through our nonprofit granting system, that are looking for those upstream solutions, but they are not being assisted by the state. And they are being overwhelmed by a failed leadership and a politicization, a political brinksmanship that makes it very difficult in already difficult times.
This might be a question for you too, Senator, or you too, Beto, but I'm curious, the court documents showed that in that tragic situation of what happened with the refuge in Bastrop, that these workers were related by marriage and blood. I mean, what kind of oversight is there when they're doing these background checks on these employees working at these state-run facilities, and what checks should be in place to make sure that that's not a conflict of interest for these workers?
I'm going to hand this over because I think you want to hear from Beto.
Yeah, both works.
But the issue here is we have a leadership that is focused, the Department of Family and Protective Services, on finding problems and punishing them, rather than a leadership that focuses the department on finding solutions and expanding them. So I'm going to kick it over to Beto.
I think it begs the question, why are we privatizing the care for the most vulnerable in this state? You are bound to have problems like this when you outsource the state of Texas's responsibility. I can't think of a more important job for the state of Texas than making sure that these 30,000 kids who have already suffered extraordinary trauma over the course of their short life are actually taken care of right now. And not only are we failing to do that, we're subjecting them to more trauma through these privatization contracts that the state has entered into. I think that reinforces our idea that we've got to try to find a way to keep families together whenever possible, or to place children with other family members instead of sending them to a contract does not have the scrutiny, the oversight, and the accountability that leads to problems like the ones that we've seen so far. Other questions for?
How does a case like Miss Allen or even the little girls in Fast Shop even happen in terms of like the CPS system? Because I know we talked a lot about Abbott not, doing funding, following things through, but it seems that the system itself, it's not just one person, it's the entire system. So one, how do you plan to dismantle the system? And then two, I'm sorry, I don't remember your position here, but how does that even happen, I guess, through the CPS process, through caseworkers, management, all those things?
I'll say something briefly and then ask Candace to jump in, since she's had 9 years of experience within CPS. It comes down to our values and our priorities. And if we really care about these kids, we can't just say it. We can't just react to problems that are happening, as the governor is attempting to do right now. As the senator pointed out, he's been there for 20 years as the attorney general and as the governor of the state of Texas. This is 100% on him. I will tell you, as governor, I'm going to prioritize these kids and these families, and I'm doing it right now as a candidate for this office. I want to make sure that we fix this and get it right today. So we've got to make this a priority. I'm going to ask Candace to talk about how this could have happened in the first place. You want to join us right here?
I will, but I think that's a very broad question about cases that are very complicated and individual children and individual families. So as to how did those specific situations where children are placed in a setting that's not appropriate, when there might be a family member available for them, or in a setting that doesn't have appropriate oversight, I don't know. I wasn't the caseworker who made those decisions, and those things are very complicated. So a direct answer, unfortunately, and this is unsatisfying, I can't say. But placement decisions are made, and the department, to really actually give them some credit, has done a lot of work to support kinship caregivers in caring for their own family members who might be in the system or who might need alternative care away from their parents for their safety. So there is a lot of support available for those caregivers, but there also is a process to make sure that they are going to be able to safely manage those children's care.
Do you want to add?
I do. I appreciate her. I've been a little CPS still in her. But there's a system that I've seen that is set up that will work. If there is a call from an anonymous person, a family member such as myself or anybody, on suspicion of abuse or neglect of children, because there were some children in Houston that were found abandoned. I don't know if y'all heard about that. Naked, and that's a legitimate call. You see what I'm saying? But the process, from what I understand, and the policy and procedure that I've read, and I even have copies of it, it was not implemented in my case. There's a call made, a CPS worker is assigned that case. What's the problem? Number one, there is no available CPS worker, to send out on that case. So cases get dissolved. Why? Because there are constant turnovers in CPS workers. Good families fall through the crack, and family, my daughter still have parental rights. So when a case was called on her, the first thing, once she was investigated, that she was supposed to be given this form, and they were saying, in the event that an investigation show, or until the investigation process, who do you want your children to go to? I have that form. She signed it. She was in rehab. That form was given to CPS. CPS threw it away. They falsified another report, another form. Told my daughter that she would never see her children again if she did not write a false letter. And so that's where it gets through the crack. It's from the corruption of the people that work for CPS. They're crooks. So from what I look at, it can work if everybody follows policy and procedure. You can't just write and do what you want to do and sign the judge's signature on an order and manipulate all kind of things and send it to different people, and nobody talks to us. You all are our voice. I need y'all to put this on the news so that they can see, so you can find a flood load of families that have tried and stories to you guys. Your producers probably say, you can't submit this story. So from what I see, if we go back to that, if nothing needs to be changed, only thing needs to be changed is the government.
Mr. Kayla, Bob, if you have questions.
I actually wanted to ask you something about you, but I didn't want to
Kayla, are you?
Do you see a need for a complete restructuring of DFPS? Do you think Commissioner Nassar should be replaced?
We clearly need new leadership at the very top. The governor sets the priorities for this state, and had an opportunity as Attorney General for 7 years as governor to fix this. So I don't want to scapegoat anyone else at CPS. I know there's so many caseworkers here who work so hard, and I've met them. We've met them as we've traveled the state. I remember being in Abilene, and we finished an event in November, and a caseworker came up to me, and just tears in her eyes, and she said, I don't know how I'm going to be able to continue to do this. There are more kids than we can care of. We don't have the resources. These kids are struggling right now, but I can't leave. There's nothing else I can do. That's the government, and that's the setting of the priorities, the budget, the funding, the resources, the accepting the federal money, and making sure that these kids are okay, especially after being repeatedly warned that there is a problem, being mandated by the court 3 times to fix this, and just recently that same judge saying it has gone from bad to worse. So that's where we need to change.
I actually have a foster care question. It's, on the transgender kids, the gender affirming health care. Both President Biden and HHS Secretary Sarah have condemned what Texas is doing. But as you probably note, the federal government through Title IV pays the majority of our foster care expenses. Have you gotten any whiff of that the Biden administration may cut off that funding because of the actions involving trans kids?
No, I don't know, but clearly the governor has outright rejected federal help and then jeopardized the federal help that we have right now. And that should deeply concern all of us, because it further endangers these children, and it further burdens the local property taxpayer if we attempt to pay for this locally, which some communities, to their credit, are choosing to do. In the vacuum of leadership from the governor turning his back on this problem, some local communities have tried to do their best. But we need that federal help. We need that federal support. And as governor, I'll partner with whoever happens to be the president, be they a Democrat or Republican, to make sure that these kids get the care, the supervision, the focus, the attention, the resources that they need and that they deserve. And that every Texan, as soon as they know about this story, is going to want to make sure that they get. So we should be working collaboratively with the federal government instead of at odds, which is the case right now.
I mean, on Ukraine, I wanted to ask you, in general, what you think the United States should be doing that it's not, but also Dave Carney of Abbott's campaign made it clear to reporters March 2nd that they were going to go after your votes from 2014 over the Crimea aftermath, as he called it, a legitimate issue that will repel independent voters. Do you have a response on that? And what were, those votes? At the time, you said something about unintended consequences, like the U.S. backing Mujahideen in Afghanistan. I think I just wanted to see if you wanted to clarify some of that.
What we're seeing in Europe right now is one country invading another, and autocracy trying to destroy a democracy. The ability to freely choose those who will represent us and to have a voice in our government is under attack in Europe right now. It is under attack here in the state of Texas, more so than in any other state in the country. It is harder to cast a ballot here. The governor and the Republican majority have literally changed the rules of the road, functionally disenfranchising hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of our fellow Texans. And the parallels don't just end there. Abbott has his own oligarch in Kelsey Warren, somebody who made billions of dollars while people were freezing to death in their homes last year here in the state of Texas, and then turned around gave the governor $1 million as a campaign contribution. So if the governor wants to talk about this, I'm happy to talk about it, because I see some real parallels from what's happening in Europe right now to what is taking place in Texas. Look, whatever problems I've had with previous administrations and our foreign policy in Europe, all of that ends for me, and it should end for all of us right now, given the crisis that we face. I, like I hope everyone in Texas, fully back the people of Ukraine who are fighting against extraordinarily long odds and so far are prevailing against Russia. I support our president in making sure that this country does everything it can, including convening our partners within our alliance in NATO, to give Ukraine and President Zelensky the support that they need to be able to hold these invaders at bay for as long as it takes to ultimately repel them. So there's a time and a place to argue over previous policies that this country has taken. Right now, as we are on the brink of a serious crisis in Europe, where there's a serious crisis taking place, we're on the brink of becoming more engaged. Now is not the time to do that.
I want to make sure we have Univision here too.
Yes.
Any other questions?
Okay, so I'm just gonna ask in Spanish for everyone. ¿Qué haría usted diferente a lo que se está haciendo ahora para que los niños no tengan que sufrir todo lo que están sufriendo ahorita en este momento?
Necesitamos ayudar a los niños adentro del sistema de foster care aquí en el estado de Texas. Tuvimos problemas en el año pasado, en los 10 años pasados, los 20 años pasados, y tenemos a alguien en Greg Abbott que podía arreglar los problemas, pero ahora no está haciendo nada para proteger los niños y las niñas, incluyendo las 7 niñas en Bastrop, que tiene la amenaza más grande, yo pienso, para los jóvenes en este estado. Como gobernador voy a escuchar y seguir el liderazgo de la gente que están parte del sistema de CPS, la gente que están trabajando, los miembros del Senado que están haciendo todo lo que pueden para mejorar la situación, y vamos a arreglar el problema esta vez.
Gracias.
Gracias a usted. Thank you all for coming out today. We really appreciate it. Thank you all for being part of this. Really great work. Thank you.
And some of them want to stick around to get our, make sure we have their names spelled out.
Yes, and their names.
Oh yeah.
Yes.